Well, the first thing I'd like to address is sort of the overarching theme of his opening statement there, which is this idea that gender roles may exist in whatever capacity, they evolve over time, but they definitely shouldn't be enforced. I agree with this. No one's saying that gender roles should be enforced, but what's interesting is that while they may evolve over time, certain men in certain societies might dress a certain way, other men might cry before a knighting ceremony or something like that. Ultimately, the biological roots of how men and women behave are one-to-one all throughout history and all throughout different societies. Moreover, who is enforcing them? Where is like the gender role Stasi going door to door and being like, are you barefoot, naked, pregnant in the kitchen or whatever? This is just simply not happening. In fact, it's actually being enforced in the opposite direction through, frankly, institutional soft power. I mean, look at where you see in the media. The messaging is always anti-traditional. It's always why women who, well, frankly, white women. Why white women need to stop having kids? Why white people need to stop having kids right now? It is all anti-natalist propaganda. He did also make an interesting point there that I think is true, which is that it is more difficult now to get married. This isn't necessarily because tradition in itself has failed, but because of things like economic structures, offshoring a manufacturing base. It is true that what we had in the 1950s is not what we have now, and that is a problem. So this is sort of an abstract discussion in that regard. Another thing that he mentioned there was less autonomy for women. I would be curious to see how that's defined. What does that even mean? Like, yeah, if you are legally enshrined via some document that you are married to this man, sure, there's going to be a little bit of limitations on that behavior, but I would be curious to see why that's inherently bad. Also, domestic abuse. Careful. Who defines that? I mean, there is often a lot of embellishing that goes on in these cases. Obviously, no one here is for domestic abuse, but I would be curious to see what that was actually looking like back then, because you can look at it from what was legally allowed and what was legally not allowed. But in terms of the actual instances of it occurring, you often hear this leftist trope of like, oh, women in the 50s were getting abused, and it's like, oh, okay. Hey, grandma, is that true? Oh, no, sweetie, that's not. It's just like all this manufactured historical revisionism. Also, the decline in marriage through the 50s, it is true that the 50s were kind of the peak, but the decline began much further than that, right? I mean, through things like no-fault divorce, normalization of the sexual revolution, things like that. That's why marriage has declined, and it is good, and it does make people happier. And actually, you can look at studies that have surveyed 1,500 couples, or another one that's surveyed 40,000 people, and they find that couples in more traditional marriages, read less egalitarian marriages, are actually happier and stay together longer. In terms of women earning more leading to divorce, well, if you look at who's initiating the divorce, it's like 80% women. So I don't think it's exactly the man just being emasculated. I think it's more of what maybe the more incel types in the crowd would recognize as hypergamy. Women, regardless of their income, want men who earn more than they do. All across the world, all throughout time, they are attracted to resource and status. I mean, this is just the way that these things go. In terms of why do they still do housework, it's not because they're trying to coddle their stupid husband. It's if you look at the way that men and women solve problems, men solve problems by looking at it and reducing it to its most componental forms and kind of solving it from there. Women tend to be much more meticulous. For those of us married, you might recall a situation where you were assigned to do a chore and you did it because you're not like this character of like, no, I'm the man. You did it, and your wife comes by and she's like, no, let me do it. You didn't do it right. That's just the way that these things go. So yeah, they're still doing the housework, but I don't think it's because they're like trying to help out their like poor husband. I'd be curious to see the sort of psychoanalysis on this too. Is Hunter a stay-at-home dad? Is he insecure in that role? Who knows? But maybe you just feel like you failed as a man. Well, maybe that is what it is. You failed as a man. There's something going on within you that feels like you failed to provide. Maybe that's not socially constructed. Maybe that's just a reality. Like, it's not like this situation where, oh, I feel like I should be LARPing the 1950s, but I can't afford a Bel Air. What? I'm just distraught. Maybe it's like the most fundamental components of who you are as a man is actually being challenged by your inability to provide. I think that's very important to consider. Also, why is it bad? Why is it bad that, men might be earning more, women might be earning less? I fail to see how that's bad. And of course, he did neglect to address all of the biological components that I was certain to mention in my introduction. Very important stuff. He also brought up the suicide rates, male suicide, because of these harmful gender stereotypes. When they were at their peak in the 1950s, let's say, what are you, some kind of fairy? Kids weren't killing themselves at the rate they are now. Men weren't killing themselves at the rate they are now. So when gender roles were the most strict, the suicide rates and the depression rates in both genders were not what they are now. So I fail to see how that computes. Equal partnership is another thing he brought up. I would be curious to see how they define that. A lot of married couples I know who are more traditional consider themselves equal in the sense that the man provides, the woman takes care of the other things. And with the divorce court thing, I think it's also fair to say they tend to frame men as abusers more than they frame women as like nurturers. You're not going to have like some liberal judge who's like, oh, the women are just so good at nurturing, it's going to be like, men are evil. So, yes.
All right, well, there was a lot there, so let me try to put some of it. Some of this is from John, your opening here. So you seem to be really set on this biological difference here, and I don't know if maybe some other blue-haired lefties have like a weirder position, but obviously biology is real. Yes, of course. And you even talk about how men and women have brain differences, and even some of that is true. However, I think you left out something very important, which is that brains are malleable. They are like plastic. You can talk to scientists about this. And so social norms, essentially, have the potential to change how your brain operates. So that could also play a role in why you see differences in male and female brains. But again, biology is real. I'm not denying that. Again, the problem comes when you are trying to enforce these gender roles on other people. And I don't know why you would say you're not trying to enforce them when you are literally advocating to bring America back to traditional gender roles. I don't know how you do that unless you're planning on enforcing it to a degree. And then you even go further and say, well, who's enforcing them? And then you proceed to try and get a diss at me for possibly being a stay-at-home dad. John, you're the one doing it, buddy. You're the one going door to door, making sure that the women are pregnant and naked in the kitchen. And you talk about no-fault divorce. That's another one I hear a lot about. I think people fail to understand that no-fault divorce largely means that you don't need to prove to a divorce court why you are getting a divorce, which, let's be real, how does somebody prove that they're being emotionally abused? How does somebody prove that? That cannot always be proven in a court. So no-fault divorce, it goes both ways. I don't know really what relevance that has. You bring up the study about how women seem to be happier, or they report happier marriages when they have more traditional gender roles. Now, the study you're talking about actually classified that as benevolent sexism. And what that means is that the man tend to treat the women as, he would adore her, and he would be more protective of her. Again, nothing really wrong with that. I don't even know why they would call it benevolent sexism, to be honest. However, if you look at the actual study, you'll see the reason that they were happier, the reason men and women were happier, at least, were different. Women specifically were happier because since the man was giving her more adoration and acting more protective, she actually perceived the marriage as being more egalitarian, and that was the reason why she was happier. You can read the study. I would dare any of you to do that. Now, let's see. What else do we have here? You talk about how things have gotten worse now. You bring up broken homes. Again, I've already explained how enforcing traditional gender roles can actually contribute to broken homes, so I don't know why you would want to keep doing that if you care about broken homes. You talk about widespread despair. That is true. People are becoming less happy. Again, you can't just point to people being unhappy and then just attribute it to any issue you want. The reason why people are less happy nowadays is because economic differences, and more specifically, people have less friends. People are not friends with their neighbors the same way that they used to be. And as funny as that might sound, that is a large reason as to why the happiness rates are decreasing here in America. You also talk about the increase of narcissism. Again, you can look and see why. It's largely because of social media use. That brings out narcissism and has even been shown to have a correlation with narcissistic behavior. So to just point to a time where people are unhappy and then attribute it to anything, I mean, that's not fair. I could say, well, a lot of people right now are unhappy, and John, you have a lot of subscribers, so clearly you're the reason why everybody's unhappy, you know? Like, that's, everybody I think can recognize that that's not a very reasonable or logical way to assess these issues. And then last but not least, you talk about gender roles being a social construct. Again, biology can exist. Gender roles, as far as the expectations that we expect from certain people, those can be, and largely are, socially constructed. There's a reason why gender roles have changed. And Doyle, you point to a lot of similarities between history and how there were some similarities there, but I feel like you've also left out some major differences. For example, this is a pretty funny one, but small penises used to be a sign of masculinity. There's a reason why these ancient statues all depict men with Did my mic die? Okay. Depict men with these tiny little penises, and it's because at the time, having a large penis was seen as barbaric and ridiculous and the antithesis of masculinity. So I think that it's really important to dig into the nitty-gritty there, the nuance. I didn't get to hit on everything, but I feel like I was able to address some of the main points you made there.
John, you have 5 minutes to respond. No problem.
Hold on, I never learned how to write correctly. So he acknowledged correctly that biology is real. Neuroplasticity is also something that is real. If you're familiar with the dissertation, you know that the effects of this are real. The thing is, though, neuroplasticity, socialization, whatever you'd like to call it, you can best isolate with babies and with young children, like we did so conveniently in my introduction. And if that were the case, that neuroplasticity, brains can be molded, you'd expect to see like maybe 50-50, 40-60 in terms of like where the babies are landing on the gender role spectrum. It's 1-to-1. It's 100% of the time. Also, in terms of how enforcing it, are we really supposed to believe that Hunter Avallone gives a damn what I think about anything? That me making a little quip about a stay-at-home dad is somehow making stay-at-home dads insecure in the role? Absolutely not. But in terms of how it's being enforced, it's not so much enforcing it, it's simply removing the barriers. It is simply removing the propaganda that is telling young men and young women that the best thing they can do is pursue a career and not get married, and hookup culture and women wanting children is like outdated and cringe, and it's actually empowering to be a sentient fleshlight. That type of influence does get in people's brains. And so you can actually poll young people, and what you'll find is that many of them still report wanting to get married and wanting to have kids, believing that males and females are completely equal in the sense that they are the same. But then they'll also say, well, of course I'm a feminist, of course I believe these things. So they are much less likely to want to say things that are socially unacceptable, but they still believe in their brains that they want to pursue things that would be regarded as more traditional. Also, benevolent sexism, call it what you want. Like, yeah, that sounds like pretty good to me. I don't know. It's like, oh, well, you're saying that the males and the females in the relationship were happy. Well, they were happy for different reasons. Because they're men and women. Yes, obviously. And also like, well, the woman actually, she's getting one up on you because she perceives it differently. She thinks it's actually equal. Who cares? Let her think what she wants. Okay, do your thing. That's fine. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't have an effect on the relationship. Everybody's happy. Everything's fine. He is correct about the less friends, the relationships in general being in decline. It is true. This is symptomatic of industrial society, of technology, of things like that. And of course, these are problems and they have caused relationships to degrade. I am simply trying to remove the influence of the people who are purposefully trying from the top down to psyop young men and women into pursuing a life of hedonism as opposed to a life that is more meaningful through the creation of a family. In terms of suicide, depression, things like that, as mentioned in my intro, males and females experience depression much differently. Men are more likely to feel depressed if they feel like they have failed in their role. Females are more likely to feel depressed if they sort of are off-put by the environment. You can also see this in their suicide rates, for example. Men are more likely to successfully commit suicide. Women are more likely to successfully attempt suicide. I'm sure we can see the picture. A male is in a position and he's like, yeah, there's no way out of this. Shotgun to the head. A woman might be having an emotional episode and just kind of does something and goes to the hospital, everything's fine. I'm sorry, but this is just the case. So in terms of like what we expect from our partners being socially constructed, it's the same throughout cultures. Every single culture wanted the status, wanted the youth, wanted the beautiful young woman. That is the same. In terms of the little differences, this guy wanted it, it's like, okay, find me a big difference. Find me a culture that was like, actually, women are running the show. Actually, women are exclusively the providers, exclusively not the nurturers. There's literally not one society that does this. Also, the small penis thing, look, we've all been in high school, we've all doodled or whatever. Men just, that's what we do. We plant the flag. And I think that it's probably more likely that the artists who were sculpting those sculptures knew that if they made a more accurate depiction of the male appendage, that would be all that people looked at. So I think it's actually historically accurate to say that the reason they did that was to to remove the distraction from the appendage and focus more on the beauty of the rest of the statue. And also, I would urge you, my new friend, I don't think that arguing that having a small penis is actually very masculine is going to give you the look that you would like it to.
You have 5 minutes, Hunter.
Is this working? Okay. First of all, I was arguing the small penis thing on your behalf, actually, so, But no, all kidding aside, you're just wrong about the small penis thing, okay? We should focus on that a little bit more. But, no, but seriously, first of all, I'm not arguing that having a small penis nowadays is masculine. I'm arguing...
Still fixated on it.
Come on, we're all adults here, guys. Let's go. I'm arguing that at one point that was considered masculine, and no, it wasn't just because they were worried that people wouldn't pay attention to the other sculpture. You can read about this from historians. Ancient Greece specifically sculpted men with small penises because that was considered the highest degree of what they would consider then male beauty. You ask for an example of when women ran the show. Again, I think that you're a little confused here. Biology is real. For a long, long time, men have ran the show, and that is largely because they have testosterone. They are stronger, yes. When we were back in the cavemen days, or the days in which you needed to be out doing physical labor consistently, then yes, men were obviously going to do better there. They have testosterone. Again, I am not denying that there are biological differences between males and females. What I'm saying is that just because at one point men were the providers due to testosterone does not mean that nowadays, since testosterone is not nearly as important for providing, considering a lot of labor jobs have significantly decreased, that shouldn't be an expectation that we force on men or stigmatize them if they just don't adhere to that. You also bring up the baby boys. Baby boys are more emotionally reactive than baby girls. I don't know if you're aware of that, John, but that is a fact of the matter, that baby boys react to more emotion, they express more emotion, but it's once they get older that starts to decrease. And they've done studies with communication styles of mothers, and they found that the mother would be very receptive and cool and chill when the daughter was being very emotionally expressive, but not so much with the boys. And it's not surprising that by the time they were 6 years old, boys had less emotional intelligence. A lot of that is, again, because of socialization. You ask why I care, what your opinion is. You say, do I honestly think that anybody is gonna, or why I would care about what you say. But then you go on to say that hookup culture gets in people's brains. If hookup culture and these other ideals can subconsciously get in people's minds, I don't know why your ideas couldn't, unless you're really willing to bite that bullet. I guess you're really just that insignificant if you want to go that way. But again, a lot of these issues can be attributed to expectation. It's not that there are no differences between males and females. It's that expecting males and females to act a certain way solely because they might be biologically predisposed to this behavior does more harm than good. It destroys families. It negatively impacts children. It negatively impacts men. Let's see. Let me go over one more here. Even further, when you talk about how we should kind of go the direction of our biology, we're not a slave to biology. Not at all. Part of the reason that humans have become so advanced is because we recognize biological urges and desires that are not always right. That's how humans got to where they are today. Even more so, again, if a woman wants to be a caregiver or wants to be more nurturing with the family, that is by all means A-okay with me. But when you force it, why is it that women report more negative feelings when they are in these roles? Why is it that women report more depression when they are stay-at-home moms? This doesn't mean being a stay-at-home mom is bad. It doesn't mean it's bad for women to be nurturing. It means that it's more likely to result in negative outcomes when you try and enforce it on people. So I say, let's be real Americans and just let people live their lives freely so long as it's not hurting other people. Cope. John.